YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Each week I'm going to take you with me on my adventures in the world of cars. Let's get into it. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about why I chose to put Expel, which is a paint protection film, on the car. I'll talk about some of the pros and cons as to why I would want to or not want to, and some of the alternatives such as ceramic coating. All right, so the age-old question, to protect or not protect? This is something that came up in the comments on one of my earlier videos, was the cost involved in doing a paint protection film on your car. And I hadn't really ever thought about doing a video on it, but it actually made sense because the discussion definitely led into some interesting ideas. So for anyone who's not aware, paint protection film is basically a clear vinyl that you can put on your car. It has an adhesive, but it is not something that leaves residue, and it will protect the car from stone chips and salt and things that would otherwise affect the paint of your car. And so if you look at the features of paint protection film, on paper you'd think, well, everybody should do that. It protects the paint, it protects the finish of the car, it makes sure there's no scratches, and it sounds like a really good idea. And ultimately that was something I chose to do. So for a little background, almost my entire car has Expel, which is one of the brands of paint protection film on it, PPF. I bought the film when I bought the car, so I had the dealership install it with a professional Expel installer that gives you a lifetime warranty, and you make sure that somebody's doing it right. They're under the kind of the close watchful eye of the people at the dealership. So that was one of the biggest things. I wanted to protect the paint on the car. I wanted to prevent stone chips. I know that that stuff gets really expensive if you have, you know, a ding or a nick that you want to get rid of. And so it was something that was pretty important to me. But there are a couple downsides. One is cost. The cost of doing it, it was about $3,600 on top of the cost of the brand new car. So it was a pretty expensive thing to do. And it actually was one of those things where they offered a few different packages. You could get like the front bumper and the fenders, or you could get the whole car. And there wasn't something intermediate where you could get most of the car, but maybe not parts that don't need it. And so I had to work with the dealership to figure out, you know, what aspects of the car do I want protected and what don't I. So I want to talk through a couple of the benefits. Obviously there's the stone protection, which is pretty remarkable. I've had a couple experiences which necessitated having paint protection film, and I would have had very expensive repairs otherwise. So there are two examples that come to mind. One, I was driving the Corvette, I was on the highway, and up quite a ways ahead of me was a dump truck, must have just come from a construction site. He hit a bump, and now he was in the slow lane, I was actually all the way over in the fast lane, and he hit a bump, and probably several shovels full, if not more, of gravel just bounced off the back of his truck, just dumped onto the highway. And these stones were bouncing and flying and pinging, and even though I was all the way over, I was far enough back from him that several of these stones bounced off my car. It sounded like gunshots. One hit the windshield, thankfully it didn't do any damage, but it was very loud. It was, immediately I knew that, oh, that's gonna be expensive. And I didn't even think about the Expel at the time, that it might protect from something like that. So I was super upset. I pull off at the next rest area, fully expecting to have some pretty serious damage to the paint, and sure enough, I was shocked. I got out of the car and I looked, and the only sign of any kind of damage to the car whatsoever was there was just like white powder on the Expel film where the stones had bounced off. You could wipe it off with your finger, you didn't have to scrub at it, and that was it. The paint underneath was fine, the surface of the film was not penetrated, and it was totally good. Hold please. And so it blew my mind that this material, this thin film, was able to protect the paint. That right there easily paid for itself. If I had had 3 or 4 big rock chips, not only would it have cost a couple $1,000 to get fixed, but I also would have been worried about the sanding, the paint matching. You know, is the car going to look a little bit different? Will you be able to tell where it was? And so that right there was just like amazing. So the Mini also has Expel on it, just on the front. I didn't do the whole car like this. That thing was a lot less expensive when I bought it. But the Mini has it on the front. It's the headlights, it's the bumpers, it's kind of the whole front of the car, leading edges of the mirrors. And I was driving in heavy rush hour traffic. I was commuting to work, and somewhere up ahead of me, a truck lost one of those white plastic 5-gallon buckets in the lid off the back of the truck. And thankfully, it didn't have anything in it, but you can guess where this is going. it crosses over into my lane. I'm in bumper to bumper traffic. Everybody's going 40, 50 miles an hour. There was nowhere for me to go. You know, I pushed on the brakes, boom, hit the bucket. Hit the bucket, that would be a good band name. Anyway, so instantly I was like, oh crap, I damaged the car. Like, I was just like, darn it, this is gonna be expensive. I mean, and I saw like pieces of plastic go flying. It was like a pretty serious impact. I get to the parking garage, I get out of the car, and I was prepared to like see some serious damage, maybe a broken headlight, anything like that. Not a scratch. Certainly I had hit it. There was chunks of plastic like in the fog light housing, in the air intake on the front. I mean, there was some definite signs I had hit something. A piece of the lid was wedged into kind of the air intake, so that's how I know it had a lid on it. Unbelievably though, other than a couple scuffs, which I was able to just wipe with my thumb and get rid of, there was no sign of damage. The paint protection film was intact, the paint was intact underneath, the car took no damage, literally no damage. So that like sold me on the product. That was just like an amazing realization that this stuff actually works, and it's going to protect you against real world things that you don't have a way to avoid. Similar to the dump truck, even though I was 3 lanes over, you're going highway speeds, you've got traffic around you, you can't just like stop and wait for all the stones to stop bouncing around, and it was an unavoidable thing. Well, in both cases, it came out way ahead and completely paid for itself. So beyond the protection, there's one other huge advantage to paint protection film, at least with Expel. And so my experience is only with the Expel brand. I had a good experience with the Corvette, made sure to get the same stuff on the Mini, so I can't speak to other brands, but that big benefit is that you cannot tell it's there. Now, maybe like a car appraiser or somebody at an auction house could tell if a car has it on, but I'll tell you, to my eye, I can't. So the roof of my car and the 2 doors are not paint protection filmed. Everything else on the outside of the car is. And so if I look at body panels on the car, like the roof and the doors, right next to other body panels that do have Expel, I cannot tell, no matter what the light is, which panels do or don't visually. You can tell when you touch it, like you can tell that there's just the littlest bit of give. If you press, and especially like you can press with your thumbnail and actually make a little groove in it, and amazingly, after 5-10 seconds, it pops right back out. That you can't tell that you even touched it. But visually, the car is absolutely stunning, and in any kind of light conditions, you visually cannot tell that anything happened to the car, that it has the film on it. That to me is the biggest selling point, besides the protection, is that it looks just as if the car doesn't have anything. And in fact, I've been at more than one Cars and Coffee or car meet, talked to somebody and mentioned that I had Expel, and they were like incredulous. I actually had to show them where some of the seams are. There are a few spots on my car you can tell where there's a seam. You know, the sheets are only so big, and the bodywork is intricate enough that you are going to end up with little spots where you can see. But you have to zoom in pretty darn close to even be able to tell, and that to me is a win. I can deal with the car not looking great under a microscope or a magnifying glass if from 6 inches away you can't tell, or further. So that's one of the other huge benefits. So anyway, there are a couple downsides to paint protection film. The first, and kind of the most obvious, the biggest thing is that it costs a lot. It was $3,600 plus the price of the new Corvette when I bought it for this car, and then for the Mini, I think it was like $600 to $800 just for the leading edges. So that's like pretty expensive for what amounts to a big vinyl sticker. And especially up front, where I'd never had a car that had the need to protect the paint, or that I had never had a car that was valuable enough to where I really wanted to protect the paint. It was a lot to swallow, and especially like, is this gonna work? Is this worth it? And so that's the biggest downside, is it costs a lot. Certainly if you go and get a car quoted right now, you know, you're looking at many thousand for the whole car, if not more than that. All right, so one of the other downsides is trying to figure out what is the right thing for you to do to protect your paint. And it really depends. It depends on your budget. It depends on what your goals are. And you're gonna read a million conflicting things on the internet. And that was actually one of my biggest challenges, was there were forums with people saying, buy 3M. There were people saying Expel. There were people saying, I think it's Sunshield. There were people saying ceramic coating. Like, there are a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of people out there to get your money. And the trick was wading through all of that junk information to find like the people who actually had like real experience. They posted photos, they'd had an incident where something actually hit the film, to determine like, is this actually a worthwhile product? And that was the hardest part. It took me like a solid couple weeks of sifting through forums, going on YouTube, watching how it works, and actually learning about it. Now I didn't want to become an expert in paint protection film, and I certainly wouldn't say I'm like an expert, but I had to learn enough to understand why I would pick one over another. And the biggest thing for me was I wanted something that if I needed to replace or remove it was easy, which with ceramic coating, I don't believe that's the case. I wanted something that had like kind of real world results. And so I found a number of threads, a number of YouTube videos of people who had Expel, had it for years, and had obviously had rocks or chunks of wood or whatever else bounce off their car and had no damage as a result. And so that was kind of the proof in the pudding for me. Ultimately, it came a little bit down to like a game time decision and what I thought was best. And the thing I liked about Expel was that with a lifetime warranty, if it ever gets a scratch, if it ever cracks or peels up, they'll go and replace it, which is nice. I can go back to the dealership, and I believe that's a warranty through Expel, so it's actually not something that the dealership would be standing up for. They would call their installer would deal with it. Now, the one thing I don't know is I didn't get like a contract, I didn't get really anything other than the dealership knows that I bought it, it's in the records, it's in the final invoice for the car. So I'm kind of taking their word that it's easy enough to do. They've said that it's an easy thing to replace, but ultimately, like, I'm gonna have to find out for myself if I ever need to. But I like that I can remove it if I wanted to, or replace a section of it. Little V8 music for your ears. So ultimately, I can only speak to my own experience, but it has been very, very positive. That initial like pain of having to spend the money for it really is a bummer, and I wish it was like half as expensive. I would have a lot less hesitation for if it was half as much money, but it's not. And ultimately, it comes down to kind of a personal preference. If you'd rather deal with paint chips, if you have a really low car and you have a good, auto body shop or something, maybe that's worth it to you. But for me, I would rather have the factory paint perfectly protected, and I can always replace it later, as well as I just accounted for that when I was saving, and I knew that I was going to have to spend some money to get it done up front. And ultimately, I think that was the right choice. Underneath the film, the paint is in really good shape. So that was my perspective on it. And everyone's got kind of a different opinion. You're going to find a million different competing suggestions online, and part of that challenge is figuring out what sounds right to you. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope that was informative, and until next time, spread out.